You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. As it stands right now, Congress is barreling toward a government shutdown. House and Senate leaders are headed into a high-stakes meeting at the White House this afternoon, facing a Tuesday night deadline to fund the government. Democrats are weighing a decision about whether to use their leverage in this negotiation. They want to extend Obamacare subsidies and potentially roll back some cuts to Medicaid. President Trump has threatened mass firings of federal workers in the event of a government shutdown. All of this is going on as the country is grappling with a rise in political violence and political rhetoric that blames the other side for the problem. One member of Washington's congressional delegation recently became the target of some pretty ugly threats of violence. Representative Pramila Jayapal joins me now for more on all of this. She is the member of Congress for the 7th District in Washington State, which includes Seattle. Representative, thank you very much for being on the show.
Always good to be with you, Libby.
So I wanted to get to how Democrats are navigating the shutdown, but first off, this threat out of Arizona really turned a lot of people's heads and, just seemed very confusing and ugly when it came over the transom on social media. This is something that was posted by Republican Representative John Gillette, who was apparently scrolling and somehow came across a video of you doing one of your resistance lab trainings, talking about protesting the Trump administration policies. And this state representative from Arizona was so upset that he posted on X, quote, "Until people like this that advocate for the overthrow of the American government are tried, convicted, and hanged, it will continue." So a very direct threat against you for your trainings. What was your response to this post?
Well, Libby, I put out a statement and encourage people to read it because this is not only unacceptable, appalling, and dangerous for me and for my family. It is raising the danger for elected officials at a time when we've seen elected officials assassinated, when we just saw Charlie Kirk assassinated as well. This has been an uptick in political violence that is fueled by this kind of rhetoric. But there's another thing that really bothered me about this, and I think is very dangerous for all of us. You know, my resistance lab trainings are specifically around nonviolent resistance. We actually go through Martin Luther King's 6 principles of nonviolence, and it is a way for people to understand that people's nonviolent power collectively is actually the only thing that can stop authoritarians and dictators. And so it's a training in how to really think about this moment and what is required of people to step up in nonviolent, important, collective, powerful ways. So it is really giving power to people and emphasizing nonviolent resistance. And to me, this obsession that Fox News and the conservative media has about my resistance lab trainings, they've done an 8-minute segment on Fox News on it. They continue to try to make it seem like it's about violence, but they can't find anything in the resistance lab trainings that advocate for violence or overthrow. It is all part of the suppression of any legitimate nonviolent protest and dissent, which is actually the only way that we can save our democracy today, is through getting people to understand that the institutions of power that should be checking and balancing, an authoritarian leader, that those institutions have been overtaken largely, not completely, but largely, and that people's power is really the thing that can help us. And so I think it's disturbing for a number of reasons, and obviously my personal safety is an important one, and we're paying a lot of attention to that. But I also think it's a threat to everybody's power, everybody's ability to step up and fight back, because if they scare us, if they somehow make it seem like this kind of protest is also part of violent overthrow, which it is absolutely not, then they succeed in suppressing the very dissent that is essential at this moment in time in particular, but certainly all the time, but at this moment in time.
There is something ironic about this Representative Gillette saying that you were advocating, the violent overthrow of the government when he has expressed support for January 6th, which was an attempt to violently overthrow a democratic election. We'll leave that for another conversation. But when you talk about suppressing speech, I think that we are seeing Vice President J.D. Vance and others start to build this case about speech and about what's happening when you hold something like a resistance lab. In North Carolina last week, he basically said that the left's language, so calling Trump's actions authoritarian or referring to ICE as the Gestapo, things like that, that language itself is encouraging violence. And he linked it to the shooting at the ICE facility in Texas last week. What is your response to what the vice president and others are saying about rhetoric on the left?
Well, they're absolutely wrong. And it's also, there's studies that have been done about political violence, by the way, and how 80% of that violent political violence has come from the right, not from the left. But this is the story they're trying to tell because it is essential to their underlying and overt, not just underlying, frankly, overt goal of suppressing any kind of dissent. If you look at everything that they're doing from, threatening universities and professors to threatening and suing media stations to law firms, to the way that they're using immigration to go after people whose views they disagree with. These are all part of the same story. And I just think it's very important that we tie these all together. I think that, the difficulty, of course, is that there is no real premium anymore on truth and real facts and information. It's very much a disinformation environment, but it's scary. And I'm not gonna lie, like seeing a headline pop up that an elected official. I don't want to gloss over this either, because yes, it's about collective, but it's also about the danger that gets put upon people like me that are trying to stand up and represent our constituents. And so it's terrifying when you see that an elected official in Arizona called for the execution of a federal congresswoman. That is stunning, and it shouldn't be normalized.
What's the off-ramp here? I mean, it feels like if language is going to be the root of this, that there will be a continued effort to find people who use language, again, that opposes the Trump administration, like what we saw with Jimmy Kimmel or others, people, Vance himself saying, call people's employer if they said the wrong thing about the Charlie Kirk assassination. Where is the off-ramp to what we see as this rising tide of political violence? Because as you say, the numbers certainly still show that there, over the decades has been much more political violence on the right, but we do see a rise on the left as well now in the last couple years. So what is the off-ramp? Like, what do we do about this?
Well, that's why I think our resistance lab trainings are so important, because for me, it's all about training on nonviolent resistance, training about the movements around the world that have not resorted to violence and have actually provided the contrast between a violent authoritarian regime and a nonviolent people. To me, that's the only way forward. We can't back off. We can't become violent. I have decried violence on the left, on the right, wherever it comes from. You have to call it out. You have to say it's wrong. And you have to be clear that speech is protected, nonviolent dissent is protected in this country, and it is a legacy of the civil rights movement. So when Charlie Kirk undermines and says all kinds of things about Martin Luther King and says he's a bad man, they're trying to overturn the legacy, the historical fact of how Martin Luther King was one of the most effective nonviolent leaders of a resistance movement that created real progress for people across this country. And so I think that's the off-ramp, Libby. We can't back off. We can't be violent ourselves. We have to show a contrast, and we have to really build the power of our nonviolent collective people's power movement.
Let's talk about this showdown right now over the funding of the government. We are a day away from a potential government shutdown. The deadline is 12:01 a.m. on Wednesday, so tomorrow night. We should say the action is mostly in the Senate right now, where Republicans do need Democratic votes to pass a funding bill. But Hakeem Jeffries has called his members, your caucus, the Democrats, back to Washington in case there is some kind of a deal. Mike Johnson, the Republican speaker, has not done that, kind of a gambit, I think, to say, hey, it's this deal in the Senate right now or the highway, or we go to the shutdown. Can you kind of lay out the stakes and what's at the heart of this for Democrats?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should just say that this extension of government funding is actually because there has not been a budget passed for the last year. And if you remember, Libby, there are two times when we have made a deal as Democrats, because at that time, the first time we were in power, the second time Trump was in office, where we were trying to make a deal so that we could get the government funded for the next cycle. And they made a deal and then broke their promises. They rescinded money that had been agreed to just months before. They refused to uphold agreements for money that had been a part of the first deal. And so today what's happening is and the most telling is Mike Johnson sending his members home. He sent his members home because they have no intention of negotiating with us, but they govern. And yes, Mike Johnson doesn't need votes in the House because it's a simple majority, but in the Senate, you do need 60 votes. And they don't have 60 Republicans, which means they need some Democratic votes. And if we're going to get a deal, then there has to be an acknowledgement that Republicans are in power, which means they have to govern. It means they have to figure out how to get the votes to move forward. And all they have done is slash healthcare and raise costs for the American people over and over again. Big bad betrayal bill being the latest example of that. But so are the rescissions, so are the retractions of money for everything from foreign aid to other pieces. And so we can't trust them. That's the bottom line. We can't trust them. And we have to fight for the healthcare of the American people. We have to fight and use the leverage, the very slim leverage we have to make sure that they cancel the cuts and that they lower healthcare costs for Americans, not raise them. And we've got already in Washington state, you know this, we've got 14 hospitals, rural hospitals that are about to close. We have, tens of thousands of people who are losing their health care, seeing their healthcare premiums go up. And so we have to stand up and use the leverage we have. And it has to include, in addition to canceling the cuts and lowering costs, it has to include a real commitment that will trigger some consequence if they go back on their word, because they've lied and broken promises to the American people, but also to us. And they used to say that the only thing that was worth anything was your word when you're an elected official. Well, that's out the window, Libby, because they just keep lying, lying, lying. And shame on us if we accept that.
So for you, it's not enough if John Thune says, hey, we're going to negotiate on this separately, but we promise we're going to negotiate on these Obamacare subsidies, but we got to get this funded. No. That is not sufficient. Okay, no. So if the president is to be taken at his word, he says he's going to conduct mass firings of the federal workforce if the government does shut down, because his power grows in a shutdown. What about the risks of going into this and giving more of the reins of power to President Trump here for Democrats? What about those risks?
Well, it's a terrible risk, and I would say it's a terrible consequence to the American workers that Republicans will be forcing. But let's also be clear, Libby, that he has been completely decimating federal agencies unconstitutionally, illegally, in excess of the powers that he's been given. And those things happen, and everybody says, well, wait a second, can't you do anything? This is our opportunity to do something about that and to insist that he refuse to use his executive powers. And there has to be Americans have to see us standing up for their healthcare, standing up for their democracy, standing up for their government. And I think that it's not a great situation, but we don't have this is unprecedented. Let me put it that way. It's unprecedented that you would have people in office who exceed their power, who don't care what the courts say, who just go ahead and take money back that they've agreed to. And so we can't just operate as business as usual because they're destroying everything. So I think that we have to really use different means than we have in the past. And we can't look at this as a traditional negotiation because it's not.
Final question. What about the political risks for Democrats if they are seen as owning this shutdown, which could affect services for millions of Americans, which could affect farm subsidies, people's ability to get their paychecks. Even the military this time is apparently there hasn't been a deal yet to fund military paychecks. 2018, 2019, the shutdown was over the border wall and Trump was clearly owning that shutdown. What do you make of that pitfall for Democrats in the next election?
Well, I just think Republicans are in control of the House, the Senate, and the White House. Republicans are in control of all three chambers. Republicans have the obligation to govern. Republicans have to negotiate to get the votes they need. If they can't do that, they own the shutdown. Full stop. That's it. And I think Americans are going to be with us because you know what? I think Americans are horrified. I mean, his approval ratings are in the tank. And I think Americans are horrified at the fact that they can't afford their groceries, they can't afford their electricity bills, they can't afford their health care. All of these costs are going up from the guy who said that on day one, he was going to lower costs for the American people, from the guy that said on day one that we weren't going to put any more money into foreign wars. And yet we still are doing that. And you know what he's focused on right now, Libby? He's focused on the gold in the expanded ballroom at the White House.
I did see that post. Yeah.
Give me a break. While Americans are literally dying because they can't get access to healthcare, and we've kicked tens of thousands of people off of basic food that they need to survive, he's focused on a gilded ballroom. That's outrageous. And I think Americans are going to reject that.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal represents Seattle and surrounding areas. I personally just want to say, Congresswoman, that I am wishing you the best in the wake of the threat that we discussed earlier. It's a very scary time to be in public office and to be in the position that you are in. And so I thank you so much for the conversation. And I also wish you all the safety and, good health going forward in the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Libby. It's always a pleasure to be with you. And also to say to my constituents, love you all, going to keep representing you, not backing down.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. And hey, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.